The turning point everyone's been waiting for might finally be here, but only for one of these two disasters. And I want to break down exactly why. Spokane, Washington, and Central Oregon have both been living through record-breaking wildfire crises for the past week, with thousands displaced and hundreds of structures destroyed between them. And the last 24 hours brought real movement on both fronts. Here's the complete update, starting with the fires that finally stopped growing overnight. As of Saturday morning, August 8, 2026, the three fires burning through Spokane showed zero growth on Friday for the first time since the crisis began a week ago. The Autumn Lane fire is now 47% contained, up from 37% the day before. The Old Trails fire climbed to 43%. The Fairview fire sits at 31%. More than 75 miles of containment line have been built, and crews spent the day hunting down and putting out leftover heat pockets near homes to prevent any further loss. By the way, if you'd like specific weather forecasts for your region or city, please leave them in the comments. I'll answer them individually as time allows. Also, if you like the video and subscribe to my channel, you'd be very grateful. Now let's move on. To understand the scale of what Spokane's been through, rewind to August 1st, when the Autumn Lane, Old Trails, and Fairview fires all ignited and exploded in size within hours of each other. Winds gusting 35 to 45 miles per hour drove the fire straight into Riverside State Park, and then across the Spokane River into the city itself. The Old Trails fire tore through the Indian Trail neighborhood in particular, destroying home after home along with trees and vehicles, with loud explosions audible through the thick smoke as the fire consumed everything in its path. The Man Grant staff via medical center had to evacuate patients and staff that same afternoon, and roads leading to several schools were closed as the fire moved through. Combined, the three fires have now burned more than 10,300 acres directly inside Washington's second-largest city. An estimated 921 structures have been destroyed. Roughly 65,000 people were forced to evacuate within city limits alone, with earlier estimates from the broader metro area running as high as 67,000 evacuees. Spokane Mayor Lisa Brown said at one point that nearly half of the city's neighborhoods had either been evacuated or were at risk. Mass evacuation orders covered a huge swath of the city, stretching from north of Francis Avenue to west of Division Street. This has become one of the most destructive urban wildfire events in recent American history, and the numbers back that up. More than 4,000 firefighters have poured in from across 12 states, and even from Australia to help contain these fires. California Interagency Incident Management Team 7 has taken over unified command of the response. Over 40,000 customers lost power across the Spokane area at the height of the crisis, and air quality reached the hazardous category on the Air Quality Index, forcing residents to stay indoors and check resources like smokereadspokane.org for guidance. In the middle of all of it, authorities arrested a man named Aaron Farinacci, who they say deliberately set the Old Trails fire, the most destructive of the three. Farinacci later told investigators he had planned the fire roughly 2 weeks in advance, studying past arsonists to prepare, and he has since admitted to allegedly starting as many as 25 separate fires in the area, going back to July of last year. Washington Governor Bob Ferguson has been front and center throughout this disaster. He's described Spokane as looking like a war zone, and he confirmed he personally spoke with President Trump and Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin about securing federal disaster assistance. FEMA has since approved fire management assistance grants covering firefighting costs for the Spokane fires, as well as the Autumn Lane, Fairview, and Sinlahican fires, specifically. Ferguson declared a statewide wildfire emergency and issued a statewide burn ban on August 1st, when Washington's Department of Natural Resources reported 10 large wildfires burning across roughly 200,000 acres statewide, prompting the agency to bring in the National Guard to help shore up firefighting resources. Ferguson also signed an emergency order through the state insurance commissioner this past Friday specifically to make claims access faster and easier for residents who lost their homes. Spokane isn't the only fire burning in Washington right now either. To the west, near Chelan, the Little Giant fire has burned more than 38,500 acres and has been extremely difficult to contain, producing enormous amounts of smoke that has drifted across the Columbia Basin and into western Washington, including the Seattle metro area. Air quality alerts remain in effect across several counties in north central and eastern Washington, with the National Weather Service warning that fine particulate levels may reach unhealthy thresholds well into next week, especially downwind of active fires in Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. Now let's shift south to Oregon because the numbers there are, if anything, even more staggering. And there's fresh movement to report there too. The Roe Creek Complex, the largest wildfire currently burning in the state, sits about 10 miles south of Fossil in central Oregon. As of the most recent daily update, Roe Creek has burned 357,895 acres, and containment has climbed to 73%, a major jump from where it sat just days earlier in the 55 to 64% range. That's a meaningful improvement, driven by favorable overnight humidity recovery and more than 1,600 personnel working the lines, even as the fire continues to face red flag warning conditions, including a rare particularly dangerous situation designation earlier this month. Roe Creek was sparked by lightning back on July 15th, and at its peak it directly threatened the communities of Prineville and Grizzly, along with critical electrical infrastructure and the Highway 26 corridor. Officials say the threat to structures has been significantly reduced thanks to coordinated suppression work, and the Oregon State Fire Marshal has already begun scaling back the number of structural task forces assigned to the incident. Statewide, Oregon's 2026 wildfire season remains the worst ever recorded, with more than 2 million acres burned so far this year, already surpassing the previous record of roughly 2.08 million acres set across the entirety of the 2024 season. And unlike 2024, this year hit that mark with nearly 2 full months of fire season still remaining. For context, in 2020, the deadliest fire season in Oregon's modern history, the state burned about 1.22 million acres. In 2021, the year of the massive bootleg fire, Oregon burned 827,596 acres. In 2022, that number dropped to 436,772 acres. In 2024, the previous record year, Oregon burned 2.081 million acres, with suppression costs nearing 308 million acres. In 2025, fire activity eased off again to roughly 324,000 acres. This year has already blown past every one of those totals, and it's not even the middle of August. The Northwest Interagency Coordination Center confirms Oregon's pace this year is running more than a month ahead of the 2024 record-setting season at the same point on the calendar. Beyond Roe Creek, several other Oregon fires remain active right now. The Hay Creek Complex in Gilliam County has burned approximately 200,292 acres and sits at 98% containment. The Henry Fire has burned close to 29,850 acres and is 97% contained. The Coyote Fire has burned 17,448 acres and is 89% contained. The Shingle Fire has grown to 70,806 acres and is now 59% contained, up from 53% just days ago. And the Grasshopper Fire near Mount Hood, the closest major wildfire to Portland this year, remains active, having triggered evacuation orders for the Mount Hood Meadows resort area and repeatedly dropped Portland's air quality into the unhealthy range. Federal disaster funding has been flowing steadily into Oregon all season. Back on July 31st, FEMA approved a fire management assistance grant for the Roe Creek Complex's West Zone specifically, the 5th such grant declaration issued for Oregon wildfires so far in 2026. Those grants cover up to 75% of a state's eligible firefighting costs, and with Oregon's season already the most expensive on record, that federal cost share is doing a lot of heavy lifting for state and local budgets. Meanwhile, out in eastern Oregon's Malheur County, the Big Grass Fire has burned 442,316 acres, making it larger than the entire city of Los Angeles, with containment sitting at 41%. That fire was sparked naturally back on July 23rd and has been steadily grinding through open grassland ever since. Let's also take stock of Idaho and the broader inland Northwest, since the smoke and evacuation strain haven't stopped at the Washington state line. Sandpoint, Idaho, just across the border, has seen local events canceled and donation stations set up specifically to support people displaced by the Spokane fires. U.S. Senator Maria Cantwell of Washington said this past week that she and her colleagues received a direct briefing from Interior Secretary Doug Burgum Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins, and Wildland Fire Service Director Brian Fennessy, who assured lawmakers that keeping firefighting ground crews and aircraft stationed in the Pacific Northwest remains a top federal priority as this crisis continues to unfold. For families who have made it back into previously evacuated neighborhoods, the picture is still far from normal. Reporting from the ground describes streets where entire rows of homes are reduced to nothing but standing chimneys, while a house 2 doors down survives untouched. Power and internet service remain out in some of the hardest-hit areas, with no firm timeline yet on restoration. Community support has poured in on both sides of the border, too. In the Spokane region alone, local fundraising efforts have raised more than $1.55 million for wildfire relief, and the Rose Creek Longhouse has opened its doors as a dedicated safe space for people affected by the fires. What's driving all of this? Oregon and Washington officials point to a familiar combination: a winter with below-average snowpack, limited rainfall east of the Cascades, and more than half of Oregon currently sitting under emergency drought declarations. Layer repeated lightning storms on top of extreme dryness and high winds, and you get exactly the kind of explosive, fast-moving fire behavior we've watched unfold across both states over the past several weeks. Looking at the human toll across the region as a whole, thousands of people remain displaced tonight between Spokane and Central Oregon. Hundreds of structures have been destroyed. Air quality has swung into unhealthy or even hazardous territory repeatedly, from Portland to Spokane to the smaller communities caught directly in these fires' paths. And with weather forecasters warning of hotter, drier, breezier conditions returning in the days ahead, even as this weekend's cooler stretch helps crews make gains, nobody on the ground is calling this crisis over. Red flag conditions remain a real possibility heading into next week across both states, and fire officials in both Oregon and Washington are being clear that the next few weeks, not just the next few days, will determine how this record-breaking season ultimately gets remembered. I'll keep bringing you the latest as these numbers change because both of these fire seasons are still very much being written in real time.